Okay, so when we talk about our economic priorities here in Las Vegas, these are the ones that are set by the state and the Regional Economic Development Authority. So we have healthcare, which is healthcare bio. We have fintech. We have sports and entertainment, and then obviously battery manufacturing. When you guys see these four, what kind of feelings kind of come up? Does anybody feel like there's something missing? Does somebody not understand why one of these are selected? What do we think? So we have the four are fintech, sports and entertainment, battery manufacturing, and healthcare. And healthcare also spans into biotech. So these were selected based off of a ton of data points. Ken is part of that team that, and it came from our state. It came from people way smarter than me with way more degrees than me that looked at what the economic trends are and what the future forecasting and said, what do we need to actually be a robust ecosystem and what actually helps us diversify our economy? How many people have heard that term before? We need to diversify our economy. We heard it after the 08 financial crisis, right? Then we heard it again after the pandemic. And it's kind of like this sexy term that we kind of throw around, but then not a lot of movement actually happens. And I can honestly tell you that for the first time in the 20 years that I've been paying attention to what's going on in our ecosystem here locally, we're actually doing something about it. And when we talk about diversifying our economy, we can't just rely on the hospitality industry to supply our jobs. When we had over 30% unemployment rate during the pandemic, that was a huge blow to our ecosystem, our economic bottom line, and quite frankly, our citizens were out of work, and that really hurt people, and they're still recovering from it. So these are kind of the four priorities. If you're kind of sitting there thinking like, oh, I don't really work in one of those priorities, that's okay. This is just where the state says, hey, I think we can get the most ROI, the most return on investment by investing in these four industries. But we also know that we need so much more to kind of fill that in. So as you guys are kind of thinking about what you want to do, please do not be discouraged if what you want to do is not on this slide right now. Next slide, please. All right, so I want to talk about a little bit about opportunities. And so basically, opportunities. So I want to talk about like, how do you, when you're looking for what you want to do next, or even, and this is an exercise for people who aren't sure what they want to do, looking for something, and also people who are building something. What kind of company culture are you developing? What's the importance of having like leadership opportunities and really investing in your employees? And so I really want to kind of look at, so can you take it to the next slide, please? So we have a couple, these are just some questions that I wrote up, things that like, as I was kind of coming up with in my career, and I've worked in many different sectors, right? But at each time I applied, I wanted to ask these questions and so much more. Is anybody, of the 6 questions that I have up here, does any of these questions like resonate with anybody? Do they feel like they would actually ask this question in a job interview? Or if you're already hired someplace, would you ask your manager any of these questions? And are there any questions that you think that we should add here? For the folks at home, I will, what are the typical career paths in this company for someone in my position? I think that's always a really important trajectory to understand, like how far can I grow in this position? Is there upward mobility, or is this just a stepping stone? So then in 2 years, when I get my experience, I should probably start looking someplace else. What other questions do you guys ask? Or what would you feel comfortable? Yeah, Andy.
I think in today's business environment, if you're not talking hybrid work or remote work early on, especially to people who've come through the pandemic,
yeah,
and doing remote education and remote work, you're leaving yourself wide open for losing the person after going all the way down the path. So that should be, if not a question, it should be one of the things that's stated up front, whether they hire for hybrid, remote, or on site, and if there's what that looks like.
Yeah, I actually totally agree. And I think taking that a step further, you, the employee, or you, the boss, what kind of culture do you want to create? Are you comfortable with a hybrid model? If you're not comfortable, being forward with that up front is going to be really crucial. But also making sure that you have the tools and resources in place to make sure that you can handle work from home, right? If somebody isn't checking in, how do you actually check in them? What are your policies into that? If we're allowed to, it was a remote work, so people would work from like Thailand or something, and people are like, you can't do that. Well, why? I'm doing the job, right? And so I think that's just a company culture that is going to be new in this new 21st century. But then like people who are looking for opportunities, like, is that something that you're comfortable with? What do you actually want? And I think there's also like a dichotomy here where you get an opportunity to be more straightforward with what you actually are comfortable with and what you want in the workplace. Where I can tell you, when I first interned, it was sweep the floors, don't ask questions. Genuinely, my first internship, I walked in and they were like, could you sweep the floors? And I was like, you don't understand. I'm a political science student. I'm kind of a smart person. Like, I got you. They're like, I don't care. Sweep the floors. And I was like, okay, cool. I will tell you though, on my third day on the job, I ended up getting a real job because somebody in the office had seen me just completely like do the grunt work. And she was like, well, if you're going to do that, then I have a real job for you. So sometimes you got to do the grunt work. It's okay. But it's also just being comfortable with would I have done that for 6 months? Absolutely not. But I was fine given it was my first internship and I was just learning the situation. So being comfortable with yourself. So I'll make sure that people can get these questions because I do think it's important to just know what you, yeah.
No, I was just going to comment on one of the other questions.
Oh, yeah, please.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've noticed, I love the question about values and what values are most important to the company. But I also noticed, like, when people are first starting out, especially with startups, or like when they just get to the thing, there seems to be sometimes like a push-pull between having established values that you practice, that you see in the work environment, and the brand values. Just an observation.
And I think that's right, especially in the startup space. You don't always get to walk into an established company that has all these procedures in place, right? I mean, I was just filling out a grant for StartUp Vegas and they asked me questions and I was like, what are you talking about? We've been an organization for 3 years. We have amazing staff. I don't know what this policy is. Like, do I need this policy? I was like, this is new to me. But because we're in a growth mindset where you're like, I'm taking care of my bare minimum because what we need to do is survive to the next thing. And like, we need to figure out where our market share is and stuff like that. So a lot of it is also understanding what you need holistically and then just being kind to yourself and being able to do exactly what you can actually do. No, please.
Yeah, the roadmap is actually great.
Roadmap, yes.
Because at what point are you pivoting? Is it after Series A? Is it after a specific like funding? At what point are you pivoting within those roles if you are wearing multiple hats? Is also a great thing. KPIs, knowing how you're scaling is also a great thing.
Does everyone know what she's talking about when she talks about KPIs, pivoting, and like what the trajectory would actually look like in growing a startup? No? You want to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So for growing startups, key performance indicators, so measurements of success for each department, so that each department understands the roadmap that they're heading towards and how that's being evaluated, is really helpful just to get an insight. Talking about that in your interview also helps you understand, do they have structure? Or is it something that is expected for yourself to do? And that'll also gauge how much effort and level of work is needed apart with what you're signing up for. It helps also understand how much of that heavy lift you are doing, considering equity evaluations that's on the table, things of that nature would be great for these questions.
Yeah, and I'll be, she's absolutely right because a lot of people just get excited about the opportunity and don't always think about like, well, how long is your runway? Like, I'm excited today, but are you going to close in 3 months? And some people don't want to ask that question, but that's a really important question to know of like what you're actually signing up for. Andy, please.
One of the things that you have to be able to tell yourself, be honest with yourself, is are you a self-starter, self-directed person, or are you somebody else that you manage and provide constant guidance on how to do your job until you learn it? So do you learn from experience or do you learn from a book? Do you learn
from training classes, or did you just pick it up naturally? So when we look at the companies that you've exited, Google and Yahoo, and large companies like Symantec and Cisco and IBM, the Vonage, et cetera, the reality is that the teams were made up of a combination of people who could just go out and get it done. You know, the idea of, you know, can you get it done? Can you take the ball and run with it? Or you have to constantly ask. So like, think if you're working in a support role or a technical support role. In the old days, you were sitting in a contact center and you could lean over and go, hey, Heather, how do I answer this question? Well, there's no more leaning over to ask Heather because you're working remotely, which is why you get put up. If you've ever called support recently, it's why when you're dealing with a tier one, level one support person, you're put on hold for long periods of time as they're trying to find the Heather to ask. So can you learn on your own? Can you do things on your own? And then can you work as a team member when you need to? And do you play nice as a team? So you have to ask yourself that question: am I an individual? Am I a role player? Am I a team member?
Mm-hmm.
Do I self-start, or do I need help from others? Those are some things that you have to look at yourself and honestly assess that in the mirror. When I was with the Philadelphia Flyers and ran the intern programs, we used to joke around with our TV production guys. After students spend 4 years getting a degree in radio, television, and film, we have to spend 3 to 6 months teaching them everything they didn't learn. And yet they had a degree in broadcast journalism.
Yeah.
Radio. I have a degree in journalism. I was in a school called RTF rather than fail. But reality, that statement that the TV producer once said to me has stayed with me all my life. So just the fact you've gone to a 4-year degree or you have a 2-year technical degree, that doesn't mean you can hack it in the real world. So internships, we've all been. How many have ever been an intern? How many of you interns? I can say I'm an intern to this day. But the reality is that take as many internships as you can. And do what Heather said. No job is too small. I started stuffing tickets. 2 weeks later, I was stuffing press releases, and 2 weeks later, I was an relations assistant at age 14. But you guys have to work hard, and you have to work harder now than we did.
Yeah.
You have more tools than we do. So good luck.
That's right. Use that chat GPT. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I appreciate both of those comments because they're so true. And just the third thing I would add is that I think sometimes leadership in organizations aren't honest with the type of leader that they are, maybe because they don't know. So I'll give you an example. I think there are CEOs and C-suite that are used to like larger organizations. And when they come back into that startup space, they're used to having infrastructure around them. They're used to having people who can, make the sky purple if you ask to make the sky purple. Well, when everyone is everything at an organization, you have to figure out the strategy on how that works and if it's even possible, and you have to make priorities. And so that's a lot of pressure for you, the employee, or even you, the manager, to be like, ooh, what is actually possible here? And it goes back to those KPIs and understanding what it is that your end goal is, and then being realistic on, what you can actually do. Going back to the scale, right? If you're addicted to the scale and like you want to just help a company grow, being strategic in how that growth trajectory works is going to be really crucial. You want to say something?
Yeah, and also I think one of the things that I've learned within my journey with startups is